I would like to introduce our next speaker, a man who is using technology to transform the mobile commerce space for consumers across Africa. He's reducing the transaction costs for businesses and consumers interacting with one another, and this is directly making life better for millions of people across the continent. This man is the visionary, Mr. Ken Njoroge, the CEO of Cellulant Corporation, joining us all the way from Nairobi, Kenya. Please put your hands together for him. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. So, I must admit I'm a little bit outside my conditioning. So, I'm 100% born and bred in Africa. And you know we are socialized to always keep quiet in front of your elders and those that know a lot more than you do. But nevertheless, I'm delighted to be here and to share with you some thoughts and indeed some fears about this continent of ours and this very passionate topic I'm very passionate about of growth, creating prosperity, and possibly inclusive prosperity. So I'm not a socialist. I'm not sure I'm a capitalist either. But I tend to think that profit motive does tend to drive efficiency of things, forces a little bit of scale, sifts the good ideas from the bad ideas, sifts the disciplined ones from the ones that are not disciplined. And, you know, basically there is a sustainable sort of formula that I believe for growing scale, for getting more efficient, for getting better and better over time, and for actually solving a problem where the customer is actually seeing value. So thank you for the organizers to put together this year on year, this very interesting conference that brings together fans of Africa. And I will talk a little bit about my journey, and maybe to just connect that to the growth, and maybe just connect what my basic premise is. So I believe that I've come to believe over the years that the problems in our continent, and let's face it, there's very good stories from a hopeless continent to a hopeful continent, Africa rising, and all of that stuff. And all the metrics are headed in the right direction. It's all nice. But let's face it, our continent is really a bundle of problems. We've still got a bundle of problems. And we need to fix them. We need to fix them. So I've come to believe that the problems of our continent are going to be fixed by entrepreneurs, by political leaders who think like entrepreneurs, by business leaders who think like entrepreneurs, and by employees who think like entrepreneurs. And that's a journey. Well, I've spent a good chunk of my life really being an entrepreneur. So some people will call me a serial entrepreneur, others will call me a career entrepreneur. And, in there, mixed bag of spectacular failures and a mixed bag of some progress as well. So I'll share with you my story. So on my profile, actually, it says that I started studying pharmacy, and it's politically correct because it says, and I switched courses. So I actually dropped out of pharmacy school. Normally, and this is basically one of the foundational problems of our continent. So we are socialized for as long as I can remember to basically go to school, go and read, be well read, and get a job, and be successful. And that's really the premise of success. And in some societies like my own country, it's parents would go to lengths to sell their cows, sell their land, do whatever it takes to send us to school. So you can imagine then, going out, and when I went to pharmacy school in University of Nairobi only admitted 25 people. So in a sense, I followed the mold. But when I got to pharmacy school, this just wasn't essentially what I hoped it to be. And this story has a lot of irony because then when I went into business, I partnered with a pharmacist who actually finished pharmacy school. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So, so what does it take to be an entrepreneur in this continent? What does it take? How's the journey? Is it an easy journey? Is there some light at the end of the tunnel? Is there hope that we can have entrepreneurs who succeed and gain some scale? Is there hope that we could have political leaders who think like entrepreneurs? I don't know. So let's talk about that. So my journey into entrepreneurship started actually in 1998. And together with a couple of guys, we started a web development firm called 3 Mice. It was 3 people. So mice turned out to be always a funny thing in a meeting. But, then there was the .com boom kind of going on everywhere, and that was kind of an inspiration. So we started that, went out, started a web development firm with varying degrees of success. We became well-known in the East Africa region. Never made any money. But nevertheless, when I transitioned from that partnership, which basically sort of fell apart because of sort of different visions of what we wanted to do, came out with some lessons, came out with a couple of lessons about how to build a good brand, about how to stare into the eyes of a customer and know which ones are going to buy and which ones are just going to give you stories, and this sort of thing. So the journey to the current business I run started sometime in 2001. And when I ran into this Nigerian guy, his name is Bolaji, turned out, then became my co-founder, became my best man, really my best friend. And quite frankly, I shamelessly picked him up from a party. And we were in a dinner setting, and we were chatting. And then, this guy was quiet for most of the time. And then somebody asked him a question about Nigeria. And, I always describe it, and I said I could feel the cogs of a great mind working. So at the end of the dinner, I shamelessly stretched my hand and said, "Hi, I'm Ken. Can I have your card?" And I picked his card. And then a couple of days later, dropped him an email, and then we stayed sort of warmly in touch. At some point, then we got connected, and we started chatting. And for like 4 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours every day in Nairobi, we used to speak every day. A good part of our theme was always around entrepreneurship in Africa, and we started talking about technology and the mobile revolution that was then setting in. But one thing kept nagging us. And we said, well, when you look around, you find Africans in Ivy League schools, Africans in multinational corporations, senior positions, Africans who are well-spoken, well-educated, who know their stuff. But then we looked around and said, so where are the Pan-African multinational businesses that are founded by Africans? Exactly. So we just couldn't pick any. And so we just kept curious about this. Why? Why are they not there? What is wrong with these Africans? Why are they not there? And for me, I think that just became a really burning question. And then we said, look, so is it possible for us to build $1 billion business, world-class business in Africa, for Africa, by Africans? And so that's for some reason that just then became the consuming question. It just became the quest of every 3-hour, 4-hour conversation we'd have on phone or in person every time we met. And so somewhere in that journey, we sketched off a business model of the business we now run. And, we are not a very sentimental lot, so I'd have loved to have carried that serviette and presented it. But basically, it was a vision of a company in the mobile space. But what I think was interesting, and that was really my first sort of lesson about entrepreneurship, and if we are to be entrepreneurs or political leaders or business leaders or employees who think like entrepreneurs, that sometimes it always starts from an innate curiosity or burning desire to fix a problem that you become curious about, and that curiosity turns into a passion, and that passion turns into some kind of anger about why is this thing the way it is. And so we did, and look, this was, between Bolaji and myself, we just had about $3,000, and this Soviet thing, and we went off, and we knew that we really needed to succeed. I mean, we just knew that we needed to. And for some reason, to kind of satisfy this, I don't know what to call it, Afro-ego, whatever it is. Why do these Africans don't build billion-dollar businesses? So we started off with a couple of hypotheses. Why does it not happen? Does the market allow scale? And we said, yes, but you have to be across multiple markets. Can you access talent? Well, we don't know, but when you look around, there is lots of talented Africans all over the place. So it doesn't seem to be a barrier. Is a consumer spending power sufficient to do that? And we turned around, and of course, the early signs of mobile success and businesses like MTN were basically running across the continent, and basically with business models, and then went to the bottom of the pyramid that showed that there was potential for a billion-dollar business somewhere in that space. So we said, well, so what else? So we looked around at some of the African-founded enterprises we saw, and we kind of saw a pattern. They all sort of always grew to about $10 million, $20 million, and they kind of fizzled out. And we could see a governance sort of thing there. Basically just the inability of founder families, whatever it is, to build capacity in the second generation to move forward from there. So we said, well, okay, so looks like it's feasible. Looks like there's nothing that we can see that then prevents us from doing that. So, and off we went. So my first worry actually about this then comes from this thing. So, so today where I sit, if I had the kind of education that most of you have, and then plotted this thing across time and seen, how much money do you need to invest in this stuff, how much time, how much risk, how much uncertainty, the difficulty of making it happen in the environment, I just would never have done it. It would never have been a responsible thing to do. By no means would it make sense if you look at it that way. But you know what? Sometimes ignorance is good. So we just started. And then every time then I would meet somebody and we say, well, we want to build $1 billion business in Africa. And somewhere down the conversation, and somebody would say billion shillings or billion naira. And I would look at them and I say, dollars. Don't get the currency wrong. It has material meaning. So because if it's shillings, it's times 90. If it's naira, it's possibly times 170. I said, all right. And I stared at them in the eye, and I told them dollars. So why? Because it held me accountable. And I opened my mouth and speak about this $1 billion vision for anybody that's willing to listen, because I'd hate a few years from now that we run into each other and you ask me, so Ken, so where are you with this $1 billion business? And I start telling you, the regulation changed and it didn't work, and whatever it is. Neither Bolaji and I want to be in that position. So this then keeps us awake at night. So anyway, so we set off to build this business over time. Very difficult journey, very interesting moments. So we built this. So 10 years later, and it took a hell of a lot longer than we thought. It was much more difficult than we thought. We went through a couple of near-death experiences. I'll talk about that in a short while. But over time, we've managed to kind of put together a business. We've got about 230 people in about 10 countries in East Africa, Southern Africa, Nigeria, and Ghana as well. Our goal is to be in 23 countries that basically have about 80 to 90% of Africa's mobile subscribers. So we are in the mobile payments business. And I think what's the joys of this business, is generally been the young guys, watching the young people who go through the Cellulant journey and see it run from $3,000 business, no political connections. We don't bribe. We don't do any of that stuff. And just making it happen through sheer will or force. And then some of my teams from Nigeria here, they always say, so if you want to get Ken and Bolaji stamper very high up very quickly, you start a discussion with the word can't. Can't, not possible, and whatever it is, because, quite frankly, we are spoiled. We started a business with $3,000, and despite the odds, we always made something happen. And I remember some time back, and it's always about perspective, right? You know, you look at the same circumstances, you apply a different filter, and you completely see a different thing. And I remember very early on in our days, when we had no money and we needed to get something done with one of the operators in Nigeria. And we were just chatting with one of my staff and said, so how are you going to make this happen? We have no money and whatever it is. And I looked at them and I said, what's wrong with you? I only have a money problem once I have a meeting. So my first job is to set up that meeting. And pick up the phone. I'm in Nairobi, talk to the PA of the CEO and say, well, I'm calling from Kenya. I'm coming from Nairobi to Lagos, and I'd like to see you. I'd like to set up a meeting with the CEO. This is what we do. And Africans are hospitable, isn't it? We are very hospitable to visitors. So I get that meeting, and then I look at my teammates and I say, now we have a money problem. Before then, we didn't. So perspective. So it's always breaking down the barriers. So predictability is always going to be an issue in Africa. Statistics are scanty. Some regulatory frameworks are not there. All kinds of things. All kinds of stuff. But changing perspective always creates possibilities. So throughout this journey, I learned a couple of things. And there's one that I want you to take home. And one was actually was an experience I had actually with a Harvard graduate some time back in the early sort of phases of our business. So we had already gone through the first phase of setting up a business. So we'd gotten it off the ground. But then basically we had a business model where we did business with mobile operators and they collected on our behalf. And, so the collection cycle was very long. So we had a cash flow problem. So we didn't have a business model problem. We had already gone past the hard parts of proving that we had a business model that's working. And what I had is I had a sort of cash flow curve that, so we had some revenue, then nothing for 3 months, and revenue, then nothing for 3 months, like a heartbeat, right? And then I said, well, we are not going to grow this business unless we can address these sort of dips. And those dips were basically cash flow gaps. So whenever we got paid by mobile operator, we ran some activities, marketing, whatever it is, and grew revenues. And then we didn't get paid for 90 days, and then, everything sort of went into a lull, et cetera, et cetera. And, it was a chokehold, and it was choking the business and sucking energy out of it. And then I went out to, looking at the financing market, and this market really requires a lot of innovation, and you need to put your heads to it. You need to apply yourselves to it. And so I presented this stuff, went through the business. Is what happens is how we make revenue. This is the connection between, the drivers of revenue, etc. And I remember this guy looking at me and saying, looking at different things, and says, so Ken, your debt to equity ratio is not great. And I looked at him and I said, what the hell does that mean? I said, when I look at this thing, it shows the cash flow problem. And so basically what happens, so what I took out of that is that and I've seen this with lots of small businesses, I think the financing sector of startups at different stages requires innovation, requires the best of you to apply your minds to figuring out what is the model that's going to work for Africa. Because during that time, and I think we went through 3 of those near-death experiences, just completely dark days in our early journey. So, interestingly so, the guys who financed us were another sort of interesting set of people, completely unexpected in our thing, and it was a supplier. And what we had is at the time we had a structure with this supplier, so where we paid him for every single, so then we were selling music downloads. So we paid him, so he supplied us music and we paid him a shilling for every music download we made. So of course then we knew that, okay, you don't do equity deals very early because they come with baggage. And then you don't do capex type things because we just didn't have the money. So we tied everything to revenue, right? And so these guys had already bought the first story, but we weren't paying them because it was just a tight cash flow thing. So one day this guy calls me and he tells me, Ken, can we have lunch? And we had lunch with this guy. And then he had drawn this curve himself. So he says, Ken, so on some months we raise quite some interesting invoices. So what happens? And then 3 months is a lull. What happens? So I explained to him the cycle of the business. He said, interesting. So he said, so if I gave you, so how much money do you need to kill this trough, this dip? And I think the figure was about $20,000 then. Can you imagine? We almost died for $20,000, right? I mean, and that's it. And it's a sorry story because lots of businesses more or less are very vulnerable around that time. This was some time back in, I think, 2005. And then, so the guy calls me the next day and said, so Ken, I've thought about what we spoke about yesterday. And could we have lunch again? So we had lunch and he came with a friend. And he said, could you tell this guy what you told me yesterday? And I tell him the same thing. And then so these guys grilled me for about 4 hours. And then after that, the guy concludes, actually, it's not $20,000 you need. I think you need $30,000. And they asked me, so do you have some kind of agreement, whatever term sheet, whatever it is? I said, well, I can put something together. So I did, and I sent it to them. And then they never signed it. And the next day, they wired money to the bank. Right? Sometimes Africa is an interesting continent, isn't it? It's amazing how people still do business by staring into eyeballs. Right? And I'll tell you another eyeball story. So this is the first takeout that you need to take out of there. The financing of startups and whatever it is requires a lot of innovation. And I know that by nature, the profession, at least from my sort of non-financial observation, it tends to be a fairly conservative, very specific, very deliberate, very calculating sort of area. But my experience with basically building finance in the early, very vulnerable phases of the business is completely different. I mean, so what's up with that? I think there's an opportunity there for Africans who kind of understand this sort of little nuances and whatever it is, and who understand the sort of technical workings of the finance to basically create financing models that basically address businesses in that sector. So the other eyeball sort of experience was actually an interesting experience much, much later in our journey, sometime back in 2011. And this was basically the thing that made me extremely hopeful about our continent, because in that journey, I met a couple of very interesting people. So I was on a flight to Lagos, economy class. I was actually asleep, so my chairman came and woke me up and said, Ken. So he showed me a card of a guy. That guy at that time was working for AGRA. AGRA is an agricultural revolution, I think something in Nairobi. And he said, could you come and explain to this guy what we do? And so I went over to this guy. And then, so I was standing, he was sitting, so it felt a little bit awkward from my upbringing that I was talking down at him. So I went down on my knees and we started chatting. And he kept asking me, so I explained to him what we do, mobile payments, this and the other, whatever it is. And he started asking me, so can technology do that? Can it do that? Can it do that? Does it do that? And whatever. So I looked at him and I said, well, looks like there's a problem you're working in your mind. So forget about the technology. That's always the easy part. It's what we do every day. Let's talk about the problem. And then he basically started to describe the agriculture problem in Nigeria. And basically, the problem was that the government was spending hundreds of millions of dollars every year subsidizing small-scale farmers. And the model was government was buying, government distributes, and basically only 5% of that was getting to farmers. And then over the years, basically, the value chain was completely destroyed. Farmers were getting poorer and poorer, and this sort of thing. And then we started talking, and we started sketching on this. Anna, he had a notebook. I said, can we sketch? And we started sketching. And we started having a discussion. I said, so why is government buying? What's the business of government? And then he says, so is there any other model? I said, well, yes, we do in technology. We send money on phones all the time. So we drew nice little wallet thing. And then he says, so how do I prevent these farmers from using the money to pay dowry? And, and we sketch it, and I said, this is what we're going to do. And so we sketched it, and whatever it is. And he says, so what's the potential of this thing in terms of reach? I say, well, it can scale. So we can do 20 million farmers. And he asked me, so can we do a pilot of 10,000 farmers? And I asked him, so why do we want to do a pilot of 10,000 farmers? How many farmers are in Nigeria? 20 million. So whose lives are we going to change? So we said, we got to do this at scale. So we do 3 million farmers first year, 10 million second year, 20 million third year. I say, if it's not that scale, I think it's not going to be worth the trouble. So, it was just a nice conversation, and we did that, whatever it is. And at the end of this conversation, this guy looks at me, and he tells me, interesting discussion. I think you should meet the central bank governor. And I looked at him again, and he said, no, actually, I think you should meet the president. So anyway, this guy, turns out, actually was going for his Senate hearing as Minister of Agriculture. And we met on the economy class. So if you travel economy class, don't fret too much. Good things happen there, right? And then, so I never did get to meet the president. I think Bolaji did at some point, much, much later. But somewhere in this journey, I think throughout this thing, we eventually got in front of I think about 4 ministers. At some point, we had one presentation with 4 ministers, central bank governor. And it was the most refreshing 4-hour discussion, very intense, on what we could do to transform the sector. As Minister of ICT, Minister of Agric, central bank governor at that time. And at the end of that 4-hour thing, one of the ministers looked at us and said, gentlemen, it is November. Next farming season starts in February. Are all these nice things that you've talked going to be on the ground? And I stared at Bolaji, and we looked back, and we said, we don't have a choice. I mean, if the numbers as we see them, and the sort of back of the napkin business case was very simple. So basically, by transforming input, by tightening the noose on input, we were going to grow farmer productivity from $700, I think, average income per year, $700 to $1,800 over 6 to 7 farming seasons. At 20 million farmers impact, addition of food production, contribution to GDP. I think, I'm not an economist, but I think the figure was about $30 to $40 billion. And I think when we did this back of the napkin business case in the plane, I looked at the minister and I told him, are these numbers correct? So I said, so if you and I fail to execute this, I don't think God will forgive us. So too many lives depended on it, and that sort of thing. So anyway, so we did execute this thing, which then became the backbone of agriculture transformation in Nigeria. And there is the second lesson that possibly I drew out of that experience, is that sometimes you've just got to take a leap of faith. I've had a couple of discussions with you over the last day, and we're always worried about, is it the right time to go home and whatever it is and things like that and whatever it is. Sometimes you just got to take a leap of faith. If that gentleman on that plane and I hadn't done that, I mean, when we basically set up this project, everybody said couldn't be done. Couldn't be done in Nigeria. And I always kept asking. I remember sitting in whiteboard sessions with all kinds of guys, and they say, well, the farmers are not literate. And I say, excuse me, farming is very scientific. It's about timing. It's about precision. So what do you mean that they're not literate? That they don't read and speak English, I can understand. But that technology can address. So there's all kinds of things when you work and you stack up and whatever it is done at face value seem to make sense. But sometimes you just got to take a leap of faith. So throughout this journey, those are the lessons. So be curious. Allow that curiosity to basically bubble up into passion. Allow that passion to move into anger, because you can really never change something that you're comfortable with, isn't it? So always my worry a little bit about thing. I was just mentioning to somebody, I really hate conferences. They are always in air-conditioned offices, air-conditioned rooms, nice whatever it is and things like that. And we break down the problems and we come out of those and we always get a sense, actually we do understand those problems. But sometimes I worry a little bit. Is it just not too comfortable for us? Is it comfortable enough to get us out of our comfort zones to actually do something? I really don't know. I worry a lot about that. So that's my thoughts. And by the way, I think we're going to be a $1 billion business by 2019, 2020. It is way longer than we thought. Way longer than we thought. Way more difficult than we thought. I mean, so I'm sure there's going to be many difficult days. But, I think we've been through the very difficult, more uncertain days. We'll have lots of challenges as a business. Rapid expansion, building the middle layer of talent to basically be able to support our growth. That's always a big theme. But there are less daunting challenges than the challenges of uncertainty, having to figure out a model, kind of getting ourselves into a space where we can, get the working and shaping of a business, finding a product and a niche that's relevant to the market. I think, with a payments business, if the transformational impact of payments in the continent is similar and can be extrapolated from what it's meant for agriculture in Nigeria. I mean, I was listening to one of the keynote speakers from the last year. I think she talked about this Grandinga power project, which is conceptualized at the cost of 80 billion. I say, well, this little sort of 1-hour sketch on the plane could generate sufficient GDP equivalent to half of that project. I mean, so think about that across health, across agriculture in other countries, across governments. So governments basically beginning to use payments to basically serve citizens a little bit better. I think there is something there. So we just have to succeed. So I think my parting shot, as I kind of open up the discussion to questions, is say, look, there's a lot of you, and some of you who are kind of bubbling up around problems. You want to go back to Africa. You want to looking at kind of different problems, whatever it is. So there's a basket full of problems. So pick some big ones. Once you pick big problems, make them loud, make them bold. A good number of you are Nigerians, so that's not going to be a problem, right? So why is that important when they're big and bold? Why are they important when they are big and bold? Because big and bold missions tend to always attract people that are smarter than you, that have more resources than you do. And that's the thing that makes these things happen, isn't it? And then execute them well. And by God, you must succeed, because a lot of livelihoods on our continent depend on it. So be curious, be angry enough to do something, pick a big problem, make it bold and loud, execute it well, and by God, succeed. Because the continent depends on it. And that's our mission. I mean, I'm sure, there's lots of circumstances beyond your control that got you where you did. So there must be a reason why you're there. It's like for us. I don't know whether sort of building a $1 billion business around Afro-Ego is a sort of inclusively inspired mission. But I think consciousness of then creating an example for young people, those 50% of young Africans who are going to be, who are going to form 50% of all young people in the world in the coming future, that then can be able to say, well, that business, that Cellulant, we've seen somebody who was there. They were there when it was sketched on serviette. They were there when it was built. It was built by hand, by guys that talk like us, work like us. I think that's going to be something. And that, I think, keeps me awake at night and keeps Bolaji awake at night. We just must succeed at all costs. It's a lot of pressure, but it keeps us awake at night. And so what's the fun of not being part of something like that? It's been very difficult, but I really, really enjoy it. I have never had a single bad day in my life. Even when we have a basket full of problems, near-death experience, and whatever it is, I still want to go back, go to the office, and sit in the office and solve a problem. So that's about it. Neka, what is it, Q&A now? Okay. Thanks.
Thank you all. Can you guys hear me? Yes. Okay, good. Thank you all. And we just want to thank Mr. Njoroge on behalf of the Harvard Business School. That was a very amazing way to start our conference on Saturday. And we hope you're all inspired to go and tackle some of these huge problems. So I'm going to present this to Mr. Njoroge right now.